A couple new defensive tackles made a big impact in the Polynesian Bowl. How impactful will they be in year one? We'll talk about it and more on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. The show is at Locked On Sooners. And Josh, to me, the biggest thing over the weekend has the potential to be the most impactful thing that occurs for Oklahoma from the 2024 signing class, and that is the performances of David Stone and Jayden Jackson, and not really just in the Polynesian Bowl itself, but in the workouts leading up to it. If you saw the highlights on Twitter or you saw the one-on-one drills, you just saw David Stone and Jayden Jackson regularly looking pretty impressive. Again, it's against high school opponents, guys that are also going to be going into the college ranks. But the more and more I see out of these two kids in one-on-one drills, in game action, the more and more I become impressed with their potential and their potential for making an impact as true freshmen in year one.
Well, it's certainly not going to hurt you or I's or anybody else's feelings watching Jayden Jackson, David Stone converge in an All-American game at the quarterback. And oh, by the way, each return a fumble for a touchdown. David Stone wound up being the defensive MVP at the Polynesian Bowl, in case you missed it. So is it SEC offensive lineman? No, it's not. It's other high school All-Americans. But look, I like what we've seen, and it just reaffirms what we've already thought about these two, which is I think Oklahoma's got a couple of guys here that are going to be willing and able to step in, and if not start overnight for Oklahoma, they're going to compete for playing time at Oklahoma in year one and be potentially legitimate difference makers for Oklahoma. They looked again like that in this outing. So it just reaffirms, John, I think what we hoped and thought would be true.
So it's just impressive to see what they're able to do. And I think, yeah, you can just say, okay, they're not SEC offensive linemen, but you know, some of the guys that they've been going up against in these all-star games over the last few weeks, some of them are SEC offensive linemen, but the tools and what they're showing in these one-on-one drills in the games, that's the stuff that's impressive and the stuff that's going to translate. Let's talk about David Stone for a second. His bull rush, the power is obviously there. But in addition to the power, it's the way that he sets up his bull rush to me that shows almost like a higher level of thinking as a defensive tackle pass rusher. He's getting the offensive lineman turned in such a way that the leverage is there for him to get to the quarterback. He's just not running straight at the guy and pushing him back. No, he's using a nice little jab step almost to get the guard to turn his hips just enough so that now David Stone can use his long arm to just push back straight into the quarterback. It's just impressive and advanced kind of technique that isn't just, I'm going to run straight at you and use my power to knock you back. No, I'm going to use a little bit of my quickness and my agility to make you be where I want you to be so that when I initiate and engage with my bull rush, I've got you. You're done. You're in a position that's not going to be good for you, and I'm going to be able to get to the quarterback. And then Jayden Jackson, the quickness that this kid has in his feet at somebody that's 300 pounds is beyond me. We saw it a little bit in the Alamo Bowl practice, kind of highlights that OU would put out, but then we saw it again in all these one-on-one drills. I mean, he's got power. He can play with a lot of power. But what we're seeing out of him is a quickness that I don't think most people expected to see. Now, again, a guy that played a lot of nose tackle for IMG Academy, a guy that plays, that does a lot of the dirty work. David Stone will tell you, if you got a chance to ask him, that Jayden Jackson's a big part of why he and the rest of the defensive line were able to be so productive for IMG Academy. And that's because he's doing a lot of that dirty work, but he himself is showing off, hey, I'm not just a guy that can, stand there and play with power and take up blocks. No, I'm going to be able to beat my guy if they leave me in a one-on-one situation as well, which I'm growing to think that there's not going to be a lot of instances where he gets left one-on-one with blockers. So, I mean, I'm of the mind where you don't have these big expectations for true freshmen. You don't project them to come in and make huge impacts in year one, but I'm kind of hyped. And I know I probably shouldn't be too hyped over a Polynesian Bowl or an All-American Bowl, but the more tools I see out of these kids, the more it's hard for me to sit here and say, no, they're not going to make an impact. No, I very much think David Stone and Jayden Jackson are going to make an impact in 2024. But I think by the end of their careers with the Oklahoma Sooners, I think we're going to be talking about them in the same light that we talk about Gerald McCoy and Tommy Harris. They're going to be that impactful, that disruptive by the end of their Oklahoma careers as they head off to the NFL, that we're going to see them in that similar light. And the beauty of it is that we're going to have them both at the same time at Oklahoma, rushing from the interior, dominating up front, and making life so much easier for those linebackers that Brent Venables, that Zach Alley are going to be recruiting to Oklahoma.
If that's the case, that we're talking about them in the light that you just described, then, and if it's in combination with Jackson Arnold being a 5-star quarterback that looks like a 5-star quarterback and continues to get better and better and just ascend, then look, we're talking about Oklahoma making what we hope will happen, right? But legitimate college football playoff runs toward a national championship, playing for one and maybe winning one. I mean, if they're those types of guys, then that's been one of the big missing links for Oklahoma, has been game-wrecking defensive tackles. The other thing I think that stands out from this Polynesian Bowl about these two is, again, another reaffirmation of something that I think we already knew, but I'm looking at the one highlight making the rounds on X, formerly known as Twitter, from Brandon Drum. All the recruiting guys following this Polynesian Bowl closely and sharing the highlights. And there's the one play where Jayden Jackson and David Stone are both in on the quarterback hit together, right? So that to me just reaffirms these guys play really, really well together, John. They have a great cohesion and understanding with one another, and that's pretty exciting about what it could mean for the future for Oklahoma. Is that right here? Is that right now in 24? In some capacity, I think yes. Is it going to be the starring capacity? I'm not going to totally rule that out either, but I would probably say we'll see a little bit of that, right? And then beyond at 25 is pretty exciting to think about. But it's been a while since we could feel this kind of way about defensive tackles coming in, and Oklahoma fans got to be excited about that, understandably so.
And I know a lot of you are going to be sitting out there telling me to tap the brakes, slow the roll, and comparing them who I compared them to. But when you get a 5-star defensive tackle in David Stone and you get an ascending 4-star defensive tackle in Jayden Jackson, the expectations are high. And I've seen enough, and I've seen the tools, and I've seen the mentality out of these two kids that they have the desire and the mentality to go and work to be great. They're not just going to show up and expect themselves to be great without putting the work in. They're going to go put the work in as well to make themselves be those kind of transcendent defensive tackles that we're talking about at Oklahoma. What else has gotten better at Oklahoma? Has the coaching staff? How do we feel about the coaching staff a year after the 2022 season? Do we feel better? Do we feel worse? We'll talk about that next, coming up here on Locked On Sooners.
Well, the NFL regular season okay, it's over, but here we are. Conference championship weekends now upon us coming up. And that means there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app, it's super easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, such as their live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, or again, if you're thinking parlays, what about their parlay hub? That's the best way to find popular parlays out there that a lot of people are thinking about playing. So visit fanduel.com/locked-on and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL.
And the coaching staff, came under a lot of fire after the 2022 season because of that 6-7 year. Brent Venables, the shine kind of rubbed off a little bit because, hey, you're expected to have results at the University of Oklahoma. I think most people probably provided a little bit of context for what we saw in 2022 and were willing to obviously give them time, and you're not firing a coach after 1 year. Now, Oklahoma comes back and they have a 10-3 season in 2023, have the big win over Texas, which is a huge moment of the season, but then, have a couple missteps against Kansas and Oklahoma State on the road. And then obviously the Arizona loss in the Alamo Bowl was a bit of a letdown as well. You understand you're not going to win if you turn the ball over 6 times, but still you're disappointed with the result. So Josh, tell me, how do you feel about the coaching staff? And we can start this as a Brent Venables discussion. How do you feel about Brent Venables after the 2023 season? Now, after 2 seasons, do you feel better? Do you feel worse? Do you feel about the same as you did a year ago?
I do think collectively it improved. Now, was it radically improved? In some ways, it felt like at times it was trending that direction. The latter half of the season, though, unfortunately, took a little bit of that shine away. I think back, the most obvious examples for me, right, is, okay, the clock management, timeout usage, right, stoppages of the clock. And in the Oklahoma-Texas game, you think back right before halftime, and Brent Venables and company, they're right there. They're on it, burning the timeout to save time to go down and score right before halftime. Then Kansas, okay, the weather in Lawrence, I can understand that argument a little bit, that we weren't trying to be super aggressive in that first half because, well, it didn't really go great in the first half in general. And, oh, by the way, the weather was a factor, right? Okay, you get to the next week at Oklahoma State. Why not try to be a little more aggressive with the timeouts there? So at times I thought there was growth in at least that area, John. And then you kind of go to Lawrence, you go to Stillwater, and you say, okay, well, was there growth? And maybe that's something that Brent Venables has stepped away and kind of looked at and evaluated here, because what do we hear about the rumblings from these coaching staff hires, particularly Zach Alley, is, okay, obviously defensive-minded head coach in Brent Venables. He's kind of been the defensive play caller, we think, still for Oklahoma, right, over his first 2 years, but now he doesn't want to be. So does some of that factor in? So I would just say generically for me, at times I thought it was better, John, but overall maybe the end of the season left me with maybe a sour taste in some ways.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just the letdown, a little bit. You get the big win over Texas. You're higher than a kite. I mean, everything's going great. And then you kind of fumble the bag a little bit in your execution against Kansas, against Oklahoma State. Yeah, you turn the ball over quite a bit in those 2 losses, and really the loss to Arizona as well. Turnovers were huge in all 3 of those losses. At the same time, it just felt like there was a bit of a disconnect from, this aggressive mentality that Brent Venables wanted to play with, and obviously his offensive coordinator that's no longer there, and what they went on the road and tried to do in Lawrence and in Stillwater with these more conservative game plans that took the ball out of Dillon Gabriel's hand for the most part. And, I think that falls a little bit on your head coach to say, listen, I get we got the inclement weather, but Dillon Gabriel's our best player. We cannot keep him from throwing the football. I don't care what we got to do. We're not going to obviously be chucking it 40 yards down the field in this weather, but we got to find a way to keep the ball in his hands. Under 30 attempts for Dylan Gabriel was ludicrous. And so that's a little bit of, I think, okay, we still got to understand our personnel. Yes, we got to take the weather into account, but we got to understand what we're working with and what makes us Oklahoma, what makes us as good as we can be. And it wasn't at that point in the year that Gavin Sawchuk had really ascended yet. And so trying to rely wholly on the run game was kind of a misstep. I will say he was able to marriage a little bit the want to play with pace with better kind of game management of when we're playing with pace. I think it was all Sooners that pointed out in a recent article that, they just seem to have a better grasp on when to slow things down, when to take their time, when to burn clock, whether it was late in games or to give the defense a little bit of a rest. There weren't as many of those situations where we had, okay, defense just gave up a long drive and we're on the field a bunch, and then we had a quick 3 and out in under 40 seconds or whatnot. So I do think there were elements of the coaching structure that got better, and the coaching philosophy and the game plan and management. I think there were elements that got better. Still, there's room to improve. And, Brent Venables would be the first person to tell you that. He's not a perfect coach, perfect person. He's always got room to improve. But I do think that there were areas that did get better on the field. I think everybody felt really good about who he was and who he is, and his staff is as a recruiting staff. But we needed to see some more on-field success, and we did see that. We did see them take a step. Obviously, we got the 10 wins. Now it's a matter of taking another step, because you're going to be going into a new challenge with with the SEC, and the schedule is what it is. And you've got a lot of turnover on offense in particular, but you've got a lot of guys coming back on defense that are going to make that transition a lot smoother, at least for the defense. That's going to give your offense a chance to kind of get their bearings and not have to score every single time out on the field.
This might be not totally fair here, right? But Oklahoma was in 2022 1-5 in what wound up being 1-score games. Now there's the Baylor game that some people would like to make the argument, okay, well, it wasn't really a 1-score game, whatever, right? That's the black and white of it, was they were 1-5 in 2-score games, games 10 points or less in 2022. So then you fast forward in 2023 and you win your first 2 games of that variety versus Texas, versus UCF. And then whatever strings needed to be pulled, and I would agree with you on the aggressive side, in really bits and pieces of both the Kansas and Oklahoma State games, in terms of using the timeouts or not using them. And really, obviously, the end of the Kansas game, everybody feels some sort of way about the way that one ended in the aggressive department, but you didn't pull the right strings to win those close games there. BYU, you did, right? And you get credit for that, because obviously you did with a backup quarterback that was pressed into action. So credit for that. They found a way to win that one. But then Arizona was kind of trending in that 1 or 2 possessions game, and Oklahoma couldn't find a way to close that one out. So when we evaluate the coaching staff as a whole right now, unfortunately, I think it's a fair question to still kind of have lingering over the program. Are they going to win close games going forward? Because right now, the great programs, John, first of all, find a way to avoid close games because their talent is superior and they execute enough to not put themselves in those dangerous situations. But great teams win close games, right? They just find a way to win when they don't play their best, or somebody else plays really good and they make a couple of plays late in this series or that series to go win. And the answer right now for Oklahoma in years 1 and 2 of Brent Venables is, more often than not, they lose those games. So did the coaching staff get better? Yeah, they did get better in those close games to a degree, and then it went the other direction again. So how you fix all of that beyond just personnel needs to improve, I don't know, right? The play calls that you have offensively and defensively, they have to find that final little bit to get over the hump more in these close games where they have opportunities to win.
I think a lot of it is, don't change your identity when you go on the road. If you're going to be an aggressive attacking offense and you're going to look to dictate the pace, be that same team on the road. Don't change up. Because when you get into Oxford and you go to Auburn and you go to Baton Rouge, the margin for error gets much smaller than when you go to Lawrence and you go to Stillwater and you go to Fort Worth and you go to Provo. The margin for error gets smaller in those big time SEC stadiums. Do not change your identity. What makes you successful at home, that's what's going to make you successful on the road as well. Someone who had a big successful season in 2024, although it might have come up a little bit shorter than what he would have liked. Baker Mayfield, resurgent, comeback player of the year type year. We'll talk about Bake coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. And once again, thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We appreciate all of the support out there. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. And wherever you get your podcasts, hit that notification bell. Hope everybody's staying warm in this winter weather as well. And Baker Mayfield, man, had a phenomenal season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. First winning the starting quarterback job over Kyle Trask, and then helping the Bucs get to the playoffs, get to the divisional round, and then just came up short against the Detroit Lions in a tough game. I mean, Detroit's a really good team, but Bake, had a really good game for the most part. The Bucs offense was kind of hit and miss. The wide receivers were dropping balls at times. The protection issues were really interesting. Protection calls where you leave Aiden Hutchinson unblocked. It's an odd idea, but offensive coordinators get odd ideas sometimes, but it should not at all diminish what Baker Mayfield was able to do in 2023 for the Bucs.
Can I just say too that I hate when teams do that. Let's go for two before they have to go for two routine. I understand. I guess the analytics side says we're the road team and we want a situation late where we basically have a chance to score the second touchdown, kick a PAT, and win the game. But I just thought from a momentum standpoint, to me, I thought that was a killer that they went for two, didn't get it. And then all of a sudden you got to go score another touchdown, get a 2-point conversion. I thought that was a tactical mistake to me, but apparently the analytics dorks would say otherwise, right? So I like a little bit more old school football there. I didn't like that angle to it, but obviously Baker did still get one final chance with the football, and unfortunately throws it over the middle. It gets picked off late. So he had the 2 interceptions, but by and large gave Tampa a chance to go win that game at Detroit. And in the larger scheme of things for Baker Mayfield, for the Buccaneers, for him to lead them to 6 wins in their last 8 games, to take them to the divisional round, to have a chance at Detroit, he's gone, John, from somebody that basically it looked like his days starting in the NFL were over, that he was maybe going to be a career backup going forward, to now he's a bona fide starter in this league again. And he's coming off, his best statistical season. And I think that it's going to be interesting to watch if Tampa wants to keep him there. It would make sense from a continuity standpoint to stick with him. But if not Tampa there, then I think you'll have an opportunity maybe with the Pittsburgh or a couple of other franchises out there. So the big picture for Bake, he absolutely had a resurgent season. I would say it was his best season as a professional. And now it's going to be fun to watch where the next domino is for him, because I think he's earned himself a chance at a longer contract coming up and an opportunity to be somebody's face of the franchise for the foreseeable future.
I really think Tampa Bay would be foolish to move on. You had a bit of a kind of quarterback purgatory before Tom Brady came, and then you got some great years out of Tom Brady at the end of his career. And then, you got Baker Mayfield, and okay, you got to the playoffs, you got to the divisional round, you had a chance against the Detroit Lions to go on to the NFC Championship game. A few things don't go your way, whether it's the Mike Evans tipped interception late in the game. I mean, there were a lot of moments in this game where, okay, things could have turned for Tampa Bay and they just didn't quite have enough to get over the hump. But Baker Mayfield was a big part of what got you to the playoffs in the first place, whether it's just the person that Baker Mayfield is, the teammate, the leader that he is. You hear the Todd Bowles and the rest of the players talk about how important he's been to their team. So it'd be really, really odd for the Buccaneers to move on. I know, the contract, the salary cap, all that stuff will be played or be a part of the discussion. But really what it's going to come down to is, does Tampa Bay believe that he can be their long-term solution at quarterback? And if they do, then they just need to pay, because that's what you do. If you believe that a quarterback is your long-term solution, you just pay the man his money. That's what you got to do. That's just the way quarterback is in the NFL. Or you just hope that the guy that you're going to find after him is as good or better. And that's not always the case. You end up playing that Russian roulette a little bit with quarterbacks, and a lot of times it can come back to bite you. So, I mean, the salary will be interesting to see, because you look at what quarterbacks are making average annual value. You got a guy like Daniel Jones who's making 40 a year, and his, based on his contract situation, or a guy like Deshaun Watson who got a fully guaranteed contract. And I mean, there's going to be a pretty hefty market out there for a guy like Baker Mayfield if Tampa Bay is not willing to pay. But I do think that he and the Bucs are going to be able to come to a number that works for both sides, makes him very highly paid. If not, I mean, he's not going to be getting paid in that Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, north of $50 million a year. But it would not surprise me one bit if he's getting paid 40 to 45 million a year in his average annual value, because that's just the going rate for a franchise quarterback if you want to have one. And it seems like the Bucs believe he can be the answer for them as a team.
Well, and it's great for Bake, because obviously he didn't have that type of deal here in Tampa Bay, but maybe he's earned one. And if not with Tampa Bay, then maybe he'll have that opportunity in, again, like a Pittsburgh that feels like, hey, we have some nice parts around, but we're missing the true signal caller here. So, and he's made himself a ton of money, and he's established himself. If not a franchise guy in Tampa Bay, I think he's going to at least get another audition somewhere else next season. And I think he's put himself in position for a big time lucrative payday where he's going to be a franchise guy somewhere. So good for Baker, man. I'll be curious to watch what happens with Kyler Murray. The Arizona Cardinals continue to sing the good song, but we'll see there. I'm not totally sold on that just yet. Need to see if that's actually going to wind up being true. Jalen Hurts, things have gone the wrong direction all of a sudden in Philadelphia. I don't think that that's in any immediate danger of them pulling the plug. But if there's another season like this in Philly, then I would keep an eye out there. So it's interesting what's happening with some of the Sooner quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, and before the Texas fans get on this and want to say, hey, Oklahoma quarterbacks are a bit overrated, there's 3 of them still starting for teams in the NFL going into 2024, and 0 Texas quarterbacks starting for teams going into 2024. So we'll just leave on that nugget. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Again, we're free and available on all platforms. Hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef. Here on Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KRF Sports app. Follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at thesoonerswire.com. But until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.